From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
You know, in my nearly 40 years here at the Library of Congress, my favorite words have become, in the last 21, welcome to the Vardanants Day Armenian lecture, this time the 21st lecture. I see many familiar faces, some of whom I will acknowledge a little later in the beginning, but I see one who has been here almost every year not here. And I'd like to call attention to the fact that my sister, who has been extremely supportive, Lynn Young, was caught in the floods of Houston, went through 2 shelters, and is at least safe and sound with her daughter now in Denver. She's one of the lucky ones, so I would personally like to dedicate this event, the 21st Vardanants Lecture, to all those suffering from this horrendous hurricane. Before I go any further, I would like to introduce a friend and colleague and a great supporter of the Armenian programs and collections at the Library of Congress, Dr. Mary Jane Deeb, Chief of the African and Middle Eastern Division.
Thank you, Levon. And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Library of Congress and to the African and Middle East Division. Thank you, Ambassador Hovhannissian, and thank you all for being here to celebrate with us Vardanants Day, the 21st such celebration in one of the longest-running series of programs in the library's history. Many of you, as was mentioned, have attended these programs over the years, organized by Dr. Levon Khachaturian, the one and only Armenian specialist at the library. Never before him had there been an Armenian specialist, but thanks to a generous grant from Mrs. Marjorie Dadian in 1991, the library established a position for an Armenian specialist and provided funds to build a collection of Armenian books, serials, manuscripts, newspapers, as well as to expand the collections in other formats, such as maps, photographs, prints, films, and much more. The fund, which exists to promote Armenian collections, has been used very wisely by Levon. In the past 2 decades, he has built this collection by increasing its items 7-fold, from an estimated 6,000 to 7,000 items in 1991 to around 47,000 items today. He has also used the funds to create the first ever exhibit on the Armenian book in 2012, entitled To Know Wisdom and Instruction, the Armenian Literary Tradition at the Library of Congress. That was accompanied by an illustrated catalog, a book really, of the same title, on the Armenian collections at the library. The book, which Dr. Khachaturian wrote originally in English, was later translated into Armenian, and eventually both versions were published online. Dr. Khachaturian has not only focused on developing the Armenian collection and having it preserved and made accessible to readers, but has also organized numerous programs around that collection. The best known has undoubtedly been the long-running annual Vardanants Day series. Its goal is to present topics on all aspects of Armenian history, culture, politics, and society. In that, he has succeeded beautifully. And you can go to our webpage and find the webcasts of each of the previous 20 programs. And today, once again, to celebrate Vardanants Day, Levon has invited an award-winning writer whose work has received the highest level of recognition and who is participating in the National Book Festival tomorrow. Although Chris Bohjalian is the New York Times bestseller author of 19 novels, he is here today to talk about another aspect of his life and work. I will not say any more, as I know that Levon will want to introduce him more fully. So now, Levon. Thank you.
If you listen to Mary Jane's introduction, you would think that this is a one-man show, but it isn't. I'm going to go through that a little later. But we've been blessed with many partners in the endeavor, and I pointed out that the Armenian collections and the Vardanants lecture have grown up the last 25 years with the Republic of Armenia. And one of those partners has always been the Embassy of the Republic of Armenia to the United States. I would like to introduce to you the present holder of the ambassadorship there, who has won my praise and friendship for being one of the most energetic I have known. And so please join me in welcoming His Excellency, Ambassador Grigor Hovhannisyan.
Thank you very much, Levon. That was a very generous introduction. I'd like to reciprocate. Knowing you, having you in Washington is a blessing for me personally and for the Republic of Armenia, for the Armenian culture. I thank you for the work you do all these years, and I can't stress it enough how appreciative and grateful we are for the work you do, and we cherish this institution and cooperation with the Library of Congress. It has become one of the true cultural bridges between Armenia and the United States, a landmark event of which the Vardanants Day invariably makes intellectual contributions to the Armenian culture, to the civilization, not to mention the massive impact it makes on disseminating knowledge about our country and Armenian civilization. Well, I thank you very much, Ms. Deep, Ms. Weeks, dear compatriots, Ambassador Evans, great friend of Armenians, for being here today. Today marks the beginning of, actually, in a way, it's a new year, you know, because people are back from vacation. September marks beginning to hard work for many of us. There's lots of challenges ahead of us. You know, there's changes in Armenia, there's changes in the United States, but institutions like the Library of Congress, the cultural institutions, activities ongoing, help us maintain the overall, you know, the level of friendship and commitment of both countries, Armenia and United States, have towards each other. I thank you all for all you do, and I'm very pleased that I'll be witnessing an extraordinary lecture by a celebrity, a person who we already in the Armenian world call Varpet, master. Only a few of our big writers, big artists, you know, deserve that title. He won that right already, and I'm very happy I'll be, this lecture is happening on my watch, and I thank you, Levon, for putting this together, and as a token of our appreciation. Last year I promised I will never become empty-handed, and today I brought the 47,001st book to your collection. Very much reminiscent of the topic, you know, is the DNA, Western Armenia or Eastern Anatolia, an incredibly rich volume that provides a before and after look at the cultural patrimony of the Armenian civilization of what we commonly call Western Armenia. Thank you very much, and thank you. Thank you.
You see, His Excellency doesn't know that I invite him because he always brings books. So now, I'd like to get as rapidly as possible to the meat of the lecture, but there are people I do need to acknowledge. His Excellency pointed out that John Evans, former ambassador from the United States to Armenia, is yet again with us in support. Friendly faces and colleagues. We have Dr. Paul Krigo, who is my partner in acquisitions and cataloging of Armenian materials. We have Tamara Ohanyan and Yasmin Khan of Conservation, who have done so much to actually preserve our materials, and it's really, we have done a marvelous job here. We have members of the community, we have members from Prints and Photographs. We have a lot of friends here to listen to you, Chris. But about Chris, I have put a biography of facts in the program. I don't want to go through his numerous awards and what he has accomplished. What I want to say in a few words is that when I started graduate work at Columbia in 1968, my colleagues, my fellow Armenists, were amused when I said I have one index for whether a book is good or not. I look in the index, and if it has Armenia in it, it's good. And if it doesn't have Armenian in it, it doesn't. Many years ago, an Armenian friend of mine said, "What do you think of Chris Bohjalian's novels?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I haven't read one." And I got Secrets of Eden out, and I didn't find Armenia in it. But I loved it. It was a quintessential American novel. Excellent storytelling, wonderful prose, a sense to it that really intrigued me, that led me to read a few others at that time. And then 5 years ago, something miraculous happened to all of us in the community, and that is Chris authored a book called The Sandcastle Girls, a very personal account, a very hard account to read for Armenian Americans, but a wonderful account of the Armenian genocide. And I, at that point, met Chris for the first time, and I liked what I saw. I liked what I saw, and I felt very friendly toward Chris to the point that I, last year, asked an embarrassing question, which was, "Chris, tell me, will you ever write a humorous novel?" To which, and I have this as the email response, "Oh, heavens no, all my books are about dread." They may be about dread, but they are all exquisitely written. They are all well thought out. I've read several since, The Guest Room this year, which I urge you to read. Now, I don't know if I can say that or not, but I am saying that. And I understand next March, The Flight Attendant, his 20th novel, will appear. Those of you who know me know that I am extremely interested in the question of identity. And so when I thought of identity in literature, there was only one name that I could think of to address you. So I asked Chris if he would talk about the possible impact, influence of ethnic identity on literary creativity. He readily accepted. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I ask you to join me in welcoming Chris Bohjalian as he talks about Echoes of Anatolia. An Armenian-American novelist discovers his literary DNA at midlife. Thank you.
Thank you, Levon, for that introduction. Shadchnur Galam. Insi Hamar Meds Badeve, it is a pleasure, it is an honor, it is a privilege to join you on this, the 21st lecture. Ambassador Hovhannissian, thank you for being here. Ambassador Evans, thank you for being here. I thank all of you for joining me this Friday of Labor Day weekend. It is a particular pleasure to be with all of you here at the Library of Congress, because the last time I was here was indeed 5 years ago for Levon's remarkable curated exhibition, To Know Wisdom and Instruction. It was profoundly meaningful to see 500 years of Armenian printing, 500 years of Armenian culture in this magnificent building in our nation's capital. I know Levon as a friend, but I know he is also an enormous gift to the Library of Congress, to Armenian-Americans, and to Armenians around the world for his magisterial work curating a collection to remind people of our long, venerated, magnificent history. Levon, thank you for all that you do. It is a particular pleasure to be with all of you today because I'm not on a book tour. Make no mistake, I like book tours. It wasn't all that long ago that my book sold briskly, but only among people with my last name. I try never to lose sight of that fact. Most people presume, however, that book tours are unbelievably glamorous. You jet around the country and you hang with Oprah and Katie and Terry Gross and sell whole pallets of books. But the reality of most book tours is this. By day 14, you will have been on 17 regional jets and you will have been reduced to wearing a strange man's underwear. I wish I could say I'm making that up. I'm not. It really happened to me on the Secrets of Eden book tour. You see, what happens on a book tour is this: a publisher wants to get you to as many cities as possible, as quickly as possible. So you spend one night in every city: Mondays, Boston; Tuesdays, New York; Wednesdays, Washington; Thursdays, LA. And you do this for 3 weeks. One night, one city, one hotel. If you're a novelist, there's nothing in the world you want more than 2 nights in a row in the same city, in the same hotel, for one reason and one reason only: laundry. You need that second full night to get your laundry taken care of. So on the Secrets of Eden book tour, I get to Minneapolis, St. Paul on a Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock, and I see I'm not checking out until Sunday morning. And so, happier than I've been in 2 weeks, I send out a Mini Cooper-sized pile of laundry. I do my Friday night event. I have 2 appearances on Saturday. I get back to my hotel Saturday night, and there on the bed under plastic are all of my shirts, which have been dry cleaned, and a box with my laundry, which is book tour euphemism for my underwear. Since I'm checking out Sunday morning, I open my suitcase on the floor and I open the box on the bed, planning to move my underwear in one neat and tidy brick into the suitcase. So open the box, and in there are 14 pairs of underwear, not mine, not a man's. They belonged to a very petite woman. Now, I've done this long enough to know that rule number 1 of a book tour is this: you never give the hotel all of your underwear. I still have 3 pairs. We are not in crisis mode. So Sunday morning, the hotel laundry is closed, and I am checking out. So I give these 14 pairs of women's underwear to the bellman, and I said, here's the hotel where I'm going to be Tuesday in Orlando, Florida, and if you could send my underwear there by Federal Express, I'd be grateful. And we both looked at each other like, yeah, that's going to happen. So then I check out. Whenever you're on a book tour, your publisher gives you an escort. Not that kind. These are the lovely women and men who know where the libraries, the bookstores, the radio and TV stations are in every city, and they get you to and from the airport. In Minnesota, it's a wonderful guy named Tim. So I get in the car with Tim, and I said, Tim, by any miracle, is there a store between here and the airport that's open right now where I can get some new underwear? And he said 2 things to me that were kind of interesting. The first thing he said was, wow, you're like the 3rd author I've had this month who needs new underwear. And he said, there's a Macy's, but you'll have to be quick. So we go to the Macy's, I go to the men's department, I get my underwear, it's in a red Macy's bag, and we go to the airport. And no one flies through airport security as quickly as a novelist on a book tour. I throw the shoes, the laptop, the cell phone, and my red Macy's bag of underwear in the conveyor belt, and I fly through the metal detector. So now I'm boarding regional jet number 18 for Milwaukee, and as I am boarding, I realize I no longer have my red Macy's bag of underwear. How do I know this? I hear the following over the airport loudspeakers. Would the gentleman who left his underwear please return to security? Bedlam at the gate. Oh my gosh, they really are strip searching us now. And couldn't go back for it. So I flew into Milwaukee and had a lovely event in Milwaukee. I had a terrific event Monday in Madison. So Tuesday, I fly on to Orlando, Florida. As I'm checking into my hotel room on Tuesday afternoon, the woman behind the counter says, "Mr. Bohjalian, we have a Federal Express box for you." And I look at it, and it is from the hotel in Minneapolis. I cradle it against my chest as if it is Christmas morning. I go to my hotel room, and I open it up, and sure enough, in there are 14 pairs of underwear, not mine. But they are a man's, and they are boxers, they are clean. And so I did the last week of the Secrets of Eden book tour in a strange man's underwear, and I was grateful. You didn't know this was going to be such an intellectually rigorous presentation. Underwear, that brings us to my work, to our work together. Indeed, echoes of Anatolia, how an Armenian-American novelist rediscovered his literary DNA at midlife. For most of my career as a novelist, I've not been known as an Armenian-American writer. I've been known as an American novelist, most of whose books, not all, but most were set in New England. And most of those books were about thorny social issues and moral conundrums. Books such as 1997's Midwives, about a Vermont midwife on trial for manslaughter after a cataclysmic home birth. Books such as Transistor Radio in the year 2000, a novel of a love affair between a woman and a man who's transitioning to become a woman, and the way their transgender love story rocks their Vermont community. And by rocks, I don't mean in a good Taylor Swift Rolling Stone sort of way, but rocks as in the tectonic plates are shifting and all that we understand about gender is shifting. Or The Double Bind in 2007, the story of a Vermont social worker who believes that she has found among her clients the bastard son of Jay Gatsby and Daisy Faye Buchanan. All of that changed in 2012 when I published my novel, The Sandcastle Girls, a love story between an American woman and an Armenian man in Aleppo in 1915. Yes, that Aleppo that has broken all of our hearts the last 5 years. In some ways, however, though I started writing The Sandcastle Girls when I was in my late 40s, it is a book that had been gestating inside me my entire life. To understand the origins of the Sandcastle Girls means going back in time all the way to the last decade of the 19th century. Come with me to the oldest family photograph in the Bohjalian family archives, the Ottoman city of Kayseri. It is southeast of Ankara. This photograph was taken, we believe, in 1894. It's my great-grandfather and his family. The patriarch of the family, that's Nazareth Bedros Bohjalian. When I was growing up in suburbs of New York City in the 1960s and early 1970s, whenever we would discuss this photograph, I would always be told that Nazareth was a tailor. That's what he did. He was a tailor. At the very end of this presentation, we will come back to Nazareth, but I want to spend a moment now on the little boy on his lap. That's my grandfather, Levon Nazareth. Flash forward 35 or so years to New York City, another family photograph. Levon is now grown up. He's again seated. This is a photograph of my father and my grandparents, and it is my favorite photograph I have of my father. I love this picture of him as a little boy. The short pants, the big wide ears, the necktie that falls 3 inches above his navel. Standing behind him is my grandmother, Haigui Shodinian. Elegant gray-black dress, white collar, a corsage the size of a softball. In my grandmother, I can see echoes of my beautiful daughter, Grace Experience, who's with us today. And sitting beside them, Levon. He's wearing a suit. In my memories, my grandfather is always wearing a suit. I once asked his daughter, my Aunt Rosemary, I said, Aunt Rosemary, when you were growing up, was your father always wearing a suit? And she laughed and laughed and said, no, Chris, of course not. I remember one day when he was cleaning the oil burner, he took off his jacket. Those were my grandparents. Levon and Haigui were survivors of the Armenian genocide. And like so many survivors of so many genocides, they brought most of their story to their graves. We know bits and pieces. We know that my grandmother, Haigui Shodinian, her father provided cavalry horses to the Ottoman army and had for years. In 1915, rather than acquire the horses legally, they shot him to death, confiscated the herd, confiscated the horse farm, and for good measure, confiscated the Shodinian home. My grandfather, Levon, he had 3 older brothers. And at the start of the Armenian genocide in 1915, they were all alive. They were in Cairo. They'd made it. And yet somehow between 1915 and 1927, when my grandparents emigrated to the United States, all 3 brothers were lost to the mists of history. We know nothing about what happened to them. We know nothing of why they vanished. This little family you see in this photograph, which would soon increase by 2 more, my uncle and my aunt, in some ways represents an almost classic immigrant American story and the tug of war between American assimilation and cultural retention. That home in Tuckahoe, New York, where Levon and Haigui built their family, was an Armenian house. Whenever I would visit it growing up, I would see it is an Armenian house, beautiful, plush, oriental carpets everywhere. My grandmother's intricate, beautiful, ornate Armenian lacework everywhere. Floor-to-ceiling bookcases filled with books in a language, an alphabet I couldn't begin to decipher. This is actually one of my rugs, not one of their rugs, but I share this with those of you in the community who do not read or speak Armenian so you can get a sense of the beauty of the alphabet. But in that Armenian household, it wasn't just the books that were Armenian, even the vinyl was Armenian. A Russian Armenian pressing of Gomatas circa 1968. When the Bohjalians would go on vacation, they would be part of the Armenian community in places like Tannersville, New York, in the Catskills. In this summer photograph of an Armenian kef, the Armenian party, the Armenian gathering, you can find among the assembled my grandmother, my father, and my uncle. Behind the brick walls of that Armenian house in Tuckahoe, New York, everyone spoke Armenian. When my father started kindergarten at the age of 5, he couldn't speak a word of English, couldn't even ask where the boys' room was. And so, like so many sons and daughters of immigrants, he chose to reinvent himself, to be as American as he possibly could. In the 1950s, he became that most iconic of mid-20th century American business professionals, an ad man, a madman, think Don Draper. That is how extensive his reinvention was. And yet, his parents, Levon and Haigui, as Armenian as they were, even they were not exempt from the relentless riptide of assimilation. The one photograph we have of my grandfather in which he is not wearing a suit is this one. His first visit to Coney Island, and of course, he's decked out as an American cowboy. When I was going through some of my father's papers after my father passed away, I found a document. My grandfather, Levon, was a jeweler. He had 2 stores. He had one on Maiden Lane near Wall Street, and he had one in Tuckahoe. When he got his American certification as a watchmaker, I noticed that he was no longer Levon. He was the more Americanized Leo Bohjalian. And yet, despite my father's assimilation, I would always be surprised when I would come across photographs such as this one. This was a photograph of my father taken in all likelihood on his honeymoon. Yes, he's clearly trying to stay out of the sun, but there's more to this picture than that. Is it simply a very lighthearted, I am channeling my inner Lawrence of Arabia? Or is there something darker beneath the surface? Something all too reminiscent of what it must have been like under the searing Syrian sun in 1915. He married outside of the community. He married in Odar. He married blonde, blue-eyed Annalie Carolyn Nelson. But if he was going to marry outside of the community, he married the perfect Odar. He married the perfect Armenian by choice. Annalie Carolyn Nelson came from a broken home, a devastatingly shattered home, a home that began with divorce so nasty that not only did her own father not come to her wedding, but she and her older brother, my Uncle Warren, completely separated themselves from the Swedish half of my family. And so Annalie Carolyn Nelson was not merely Levon and Haigui's daughter-in-law, she became, in essence, their daughter, welcoming her into the family. This is a photograph of my older brother and me. I'm the baby looking slightly bewildered by the photographic process. How Armenian by choice was Annalie Carolyn Nelson? Well, she died years and years ago. But my father died more recently. As a matter of fact, he died this summer before the Sandcastle Girls was published. When I was going through all of the items that were of totemic importance to my father, the things that he cherished up until the moment he too passed, I came across my mother's keyring. My mother was spectacularly superstitious. She wouldn't leave the house, much less get on an airplane without her keychain. And among the items always on that keychain, always on her person, was a keychain with 3 items: a St. Jude medal, a St. Christopher medal, and a bronze charm of the nation state of Armenia, the Republic. My mother was the one, when I was growing up, who made sure that I read William Saroyan. This is, in fact, my childhood paperback of My Name is Aram. I still own this book. It is still my dog-eared pages, my underlining. It was my mother who insisted as a teenager that I read Passage to Ararat. And again, this is my copy that my mother gave me. And it was my mother who first insisted that I read the 40 Days of Musadah. This is not that edition I read as a teenager. The edition I read as a teenager was an old Book of the Month Club edition she had, which, alas, I no longer have. But this is an equally meaningful edition. It's a first edition in English that my wife found me one year for Christmas. And it was my mother on Sunday nights at 8 o'clock who would remind me that Cher was Armenian. It was my mother who first told me that Mike Connors, Mannix, was actually Krikor Ohanian. When I was a young advertising executive in New York City, the stars aligned, and one of the strange gifts from the heavens is that the account I worked on as a young man was Claret's, the breath deodorant whose celebrity spokesperson in the 1980s was none other than Mike Connors, Mannix. And it was my mother who first pointed out to me that the director Ruben Mamelian was Armenian. He had 31 cats at one point, my friend Vahe Barbarian tells me. I've had as many as 6. Now, the Sandcastle Girls is not the first time that I tried to write a novel of Armenian history. The first time I explored 1915 was in 1992 and 1993. I wrote the entire manuscript, 392 pages. And when I finished reading it, I realized it was a train wreck. Utterly unpublishable. Nothing about this book worked. Moreover, about this time, Carol Edgarian published her remarkable novel, Rise the Euphrates. And I remember thinking to myself, why in the name of heaven does anyone need my take on this story when we have the work of Carol Edgarian, Peter Balakian, and of course Franz Werfel's magisterial epic? So I sent that novel to my alma mater, where my papers are archived, and you can go there and read it if you're a scholar or a masochist. But I would discourage you, it's a bad book. So why did I try again? Well, there are a number of reasons. In 2008, for the first time in my life, I wrote historical fiction. Skeletons at the Feast, a novel about one German family's complicity in the Holocaust, and 3 young adults who are trying to work their way across the cauldron of Nazi Germany in its death throes, hoping to stay ahead of the Soviet army and reach what they believe will be the safety of the British and the American lines. Friends of mine, Armenian-Americans, sometimes said to me in 2008 and 2009, it would be lovely if you would turn your talents toward Anatolia and give voice to those echoes. On February 2nd, 2010, this man added his voice to that chorus. He's my great friend, Khachaturian Maradian. He arrived here from Lebanon in 2007 to edit the Armenian Weekly. I've known him since. On February 2nd, 2010, we were having a cup of coffee in Boston, and he knew about the manuscript from 1992 and 1993, and he said, "When are you going to try again?" And when Khachig says when, he means it. I had my marching orders, and so I decided that I would try again to write that novel of the Armenian genocide. But one of the gifts of waiting so long was that I was older and more mature, and I'd figured something out while writing Skeletons at the Feast, and it was this. When I wrote Skeletons at the Feast, I didn't need to educate my American readers to the Holocaust. All of my American readers knew and understood what the Holocaust was. Most of my North American readers in 2010, however, could not have found Aleppo on a map. Most of them knew nothing of the Armenian genocide. The irony, of course, is that once upon a time, all North American eyes were turned in horror on the fraying edges of the Ottoman Empire and looking on aghast. There had been best-selling books in the United States, Armenian Massacres, Bleeding Armenia, best-selling memoirs such as Ravished Armenia, the story of Aurora Mardiganian, an Armenian girl who survived the marches into the desert, emigrated to the United States, and published her story. And it wouldn't just be a best-selling memoir. It was a silent film, 8 real Hollywood blockbuster. Today, but one reel exists. But you can see that reel right here in Washington at the Holocaust Museum. You can see it at Yerevan at the Genocide Museum. And you can see it on YouTube. And among the moments from Aurora's memoir that Hollywood recreated in the American Southwest was the passage from her memoir when she looked on in horror as women on the march with her were stripped naked, nailed to wooden crosses, and crucified under the searing Syrian sun. The New York Times alone ran 154 articles about the genocide as it was occurring, culminating in this front-page story from July of 1919, the conviction for what they called crimes against humanity of the architects of the genocide. And this was America's first great humanitarian outreach effort. At the start of the First World War, there were roughly 2 million Armenians living in the Ottoman Empire. By the end of the First World War, all but 500,000 would be dead. But Near East Relief, an American-originated organization, nickels, dimes, quarters at a time, raised the money to save 125,000 of those women, those refugees, those orphans in the orphanages and scattered across the deserts of the Middle East. For the last 8 months, I've taken such pride in telling people that I'm a grandson of Middle Eastern refugees. I'm a grandson of Middle Eastern immigrants. Today, there are roughly 61,000 Armenians in Turkey, almost every single one of them living in Istanbul. These are Ottoman census figures. Once upon a time, everyone knew, but the news cycles moved on. It's not just 2017 when the news cycles seem to have an attention span somewhere between cottage cheese and yogurt. As Gore Vidal once said, we are the United States of amnesia. There's the rise of the Soviet Union. The fledgling nation state of Armenia was subsumed. There's the Great Depression. There was the rise of Nazi Germany. And so a mere 20 years after that New York Times headline I showed you a moment ago, Adolf Hitler famously said on August 22nd, 1939, before unleashing his panzers on Poland, "Be merciless, be merciless." After all, who today remembers the annihilation of the Armenians? So, when I embarked on the Sandcastle Girls, I knew that it needed to have an educational component that Skeletons at the Feast did not. And I began by creating a female version of me, an Armenian-American novelist at midlife who knows far too little about her own ancestry. As she says in the prologue to the book, Laura Petrosian, she says, "The world needs one of those black and yellow books, Microsoft Word for dummies, piano for dummies, the ukulele for dummies, the Armenian genocide for dummies, something that could educate Americans." But I also knew this. No one was going to read a novel if it was 1.5 million dead in the desert. And so I thought of what I loved, the books that I've loved, the big, sweeping, epic love stories set in the midst of war, such as Michael Ondaatje's The English Patient, a love story set in North Africa and Italy in the Second World War. And I'm showing you this movie poster because I want you to notice the biplane. That will be culturally important. Books such as Ian McEwan's Atonement, a love story set against the backdrop of atonement. And because I wasn't going to write the Sandcastle Girls for the Armenian community, because we know this story, I was writing it for my readers who didn't know the story, I decided that the lovers, one of them needed to be American. The lovers would be Laura Petrosian, the narrator's grandparents. Her grandmother, Elizabeth Endicott, Mount Holyoke class of 1915, who ventures with the Boston-based Friends of Armenia to Aleppo, and there finds an innermost ring of Dante's Inferno. It's interesting to note that Mount Holyoke had not one but two English and Armenian-speaking seminaries in Anatolia. If you visit the Mount Holyoke Library in Hadley, Massachusetts, there's a beautiful sculpture of the Armenian alphabet, a testimony to Western Massachusetts' long connection to Anatolia. Who would Elizabeth Endicott find in Aleppo? Armen Petrosian, an Armenian engineer from Van, who's in Aleppo, hoping against hope to find his beloved wife Karine and his infant daughter Tallinn, though of course he fears the worst. And so the novel moves back and forth in time. Laura's rediscovery of who she is as a person in the present, and Elizabeth and Ottoman's story in 1915. The book did well in the United States, but I want to share with you the overseas covers because they say something interesting about culturally how we approach this material. This is the United Kingdom cover. I've christened it Downton Abbey meets the English Patient. I love it. And I love the biplane. There is no biplane in the Sandcastle Girls, but because of the place that the English Patient holds in our culture, Simon & Schuster UK made darn sure that there's a biplane on the cover of the Sandcastle Girls. The Norwegian edition, Sandcastles in Aleppo, this edition breaks my heart because the Aleppo you see on the cover there exists now only in romance and memory. It's gone. The Farsi edition, a beautiful split screen image that immediately conveys the notion of Armenia as a diaspora nation. We have the desert on one side, we have New York City on the other. The Polish edition, which I've christened Game of Thrones. The Latvian edition, which doesn't deal directly with the text, but anyone who has even a dollop of Armenian blood inside him or her cannot help but be moved by this breathtakingly beautiful image. Most of the foreign editions, however, replicate the American cover. Elizabeth Endicott, a woman in white with a parasol, looking out at the Armenian Auschwitz, the Syrian killing fields of Deir el-Zor. The Armenian edition, the Russian edition, the Brazilian edition, aptly titled Desert of Bones, the Italian edition, there is that biplane again. The French edition, Elizabeth is wearing black in this one because we know the French will always sacrifice comfort for fashion, so even though it is Syria in July, she's no longer wearing white. The Hebrew edition with that iconic parasol. John Gardner, great teacher of writing, short story writer and novelist, once said, "There are two ways to wake a reader from the fictional dream: clumsiness, bad writing, and inauthenticity, bad research. I have been guilty of both in my career. But for a book such as the Sandcastle Girls, research was critical, which is why so many times over the last few years, I've been traveling to the Middle East, to Armenia, to Turkey. And all of the photographs I'm about to show you I took, except for this first one. This first one was taken by my wife, Victoria Bluer, who's a fine art photographer, and it's infinitely better than anything else you're going to see. But I want to share these photos of Anatolia with you. Among the echoes that reverberates with me always is Kayseri, because, of course, that is where the Bohjalians are from. Outside of Istanbul, there are, I believe, no more than 4 structurally intact Armenian churches. There is the tiny, beautiful little church on Musada for the 200 and so Armenians in that community, all descendants of the survivors of Musada who returned. But that is the only active Armenian church congregation outside of Istanbul. That's one. There's Akhtamar, restored as a museum of sorts on Lake Van. There's Chirs Bohjalian in Diyarbakir, restored by the Kurdish municipality. And there's this one on the screen, St. Gregory in Kayseri, behind barbed wire. On Akhtamar, St. Gregory, Chirs Bohjalian, there's no Armenian congregation there every week, but the structures remain. And so it was important to go stand inside this church. The Kurdish caretaker brought us through the barbed wire and let us in. And as I was standing there and whispering, moved, my wife said to me, "You realize, don't you, that this is where your grandfather was baptized? You're now breathing the air that he breathed." And whenever I see this image, I hear not merely the echo of my wife's voice, but I hear the echo of that baptism in the 1890s. Most Armenian churches and monasteries in Anatolia are not structurally intact. Most of them are relics. They are places such as Gaduts, also on Lake Van, once the home to our reverend fathers, now the home to graffiti and seagulls. Germovank, ransacked regularly for gold that probably never was there. This is the cradle, in some ways, of Armenian civilization. This is Frank. This is what it looked like circa 1910. This is what remains today. St. Bartholomew on the Iranian border. I must have 75 images like this on my phone. I want to show you just one more, though. St. Sarkis. Whenever I show this image, Armenians who've been to Ani, which is in northeastern Turkey at the Armenian border, most people presume it is Ani. It's actually not, but it is very near Ani. Ani, the city of 1,000 churches in the Middle Ages. But I share with you St. Sarkis because I took this photograph in 2015. If I had been standing on the cliff looking down at it in 1950, you would have seen 5 completely intact church structures, all a part of this complex. And today, this is all that remains. Why? Because in the mid-1950s, the 5-church complex was used for artillery target practice, medieval churches. Now, the Middle East and Anatolia are awash in unmarked mass graves, of which I will share with you but one. This is the Dudon crevasse. And here's what the history books said happened here over a 3-day period in 1915. The 10,000 members of the Armenian community were marched to the edge of the cliff and every single one of them was shot, stabbed, or bayoneted, their bodies thrown unceremoniously to the crevasse at the bottom of the gorge. The first time I went here was 2013, and as I am always when I go to Anatolia, I was with my great friend Khachaturian. There were 5 other Armenian-Americans. And the 7 of us, after listening to the echoes at the Dudon crevasse, went to Chankush to see the remains of the Armenian church and the Armenian monastery there. And as we were leaving, a Kurdish gentleman my age knocked on our van door and begged us not to leave. He said, "Please, you must meet my mother-in-law. She's 98 years old." And we all did the math in our heads. His mother-in-law was born in 1915. And so we went to meet her. And thank goodness we did. Because in this case, the history books were wrong. Not every Armenian was killed that cataclysmic 3-day period. There's one young Armenian woman in the line who is so beautiful that a member of the Kurdish killing party pulled her from the line and married her. She had in her arms her newborn baby, an infant. And that is who we met that day in 2013, Asya, the last living Armenian in Chankush. And as Khachaturian was getting her story, with her hand she looked at us and she said, "You're Armenian. You're Armenian. You're really Armenian." And that's when I got it. Her son-in-law was a good man, a very good man. It wasn't that he wanted us to meet her. He wanted her to meet us, to see that while she is the last living Armenian in Chankush, the race continues. We survive. Which is why when I return, I always visit Chankush. And why when I returned there in 2014, I brought my beautiful daughter and my beautiful wife so that Asya could meet Grace Experience and see yet another generation of Armenians walking the earth. Now, I said I was going to end with Nazareth. In 2014, I came across a 2-volume encyclopedia, The Notable Armenians of Kayseri. And as I was thumbing through this 2-volume encyclopedia, I came across my great-grandfather, Nazareth Bedros. There were 7 pages about him in Armenian, and I recognized him, as will you, instantly. And for the life of me, I could not understand why there were 7 pages about a tailor. So I asked Khachaturian, my Gungarhai, my godfather, I said, "Khachaturian, could you translate this for me and explain to me?" And he called me up after reading it and said, "Your grandfather wasn't a tailor. Maybe he dabbled as a tailor, but he was a writer. He was, in fact, a prodigy. At the age of 12, he was taken from Kayseri to perform as far to the southeast as Jerusalem, as far to the west as Constantinople. And he didn't just write his poems, he sang them. He was a troubadour. He was performing across Anatolia in the 1860s and the 1870s, a Bruce Springsteen of the Anatolian plains. And his poetry, it was upbeat, it was ebullient, it was an unceasing, beautiful celebration of the Armenians, the Turks, the Kurds of Kayseri. The landscape, the topography. Think Walt Whitman with its exuberance and enthusiasm for the beauty and the community of Anatolia. All that changed at the end of his life on November 18th, 1895, almost a century to the date when his great-great-granddaughter Grace Experience would be born. In a run-up to the Armenian genocide we call the Hamidian massacres, 250,000 Armenians died. The slaughter came to Kayseri. And the Bohjalian family was witness and victim. And now, at the very end of his life, despite the fact among his children was a little boy named Levon, he wrote the longest poem of his life, a 70-quatrain epic chronicling what he witnessed on November 18th. I will share with you but 2 of the 70 quatrains. They killed infidels with axes, daggers, and didn't ask who you were, whether merchant or coolie. They took the babies out of the wombs of their mothers, and those who witnessed lost their minds. Think Gomatas. I have always been so proud to be my father's son. I was always so proud to be my grandfather's grandson. But that's the thing about identity and about genocide. Whenever we talk about genocide, we always go right to the numbers, the 6 million, the 1.5 million. But it's not just the souls that are lost. It's the stories. It's why the work of Levon Khachaturian and everyone who works with him in this wing of the Library of Congress are so important, because you collect the stories, you preserve the maps, you preserve the photographs, the poetry, the Abovian. You preserve our cultural identity against the relentless tide of assimilation. I find it so interesting that, as proud as I've always been to be Aram Bohjalian's son, Levon Nazareth's grandson, that it's only at midlife that I've discovered how proud I can be to be Nazareth Bedros' great-grandson, because it is only at midlife that I've discovered I am not the first Bohjalian to be a writer and to plumb this part of my history. I am humbled to be but the second. Thank you so much. Shad Chinuragalam.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.